The sun baked the dry plains of Silver Creek, turning the earth into a cracked, dusty mirror. A young man rode slowly through the town's only street, a narrow strip of life between two lines of weather-beaten buildings. His name was Caleb Rourke, just 22, the youngest son of a once proud ranching family. His father had died a year back, and his land was all he had left. A few dozen acres of grass and an old barn that creaked in the wind like a dying song. The people of Silver Creek used to respect the Rourkes, but times had changed. The Blackspur gang had come to town, led by Clint Merrow, a man whose grin was as cruel as his trigger finger was fast. They'd bought the sheriff, bullied the merchants, and made every honest man feel small. Caleb kept to himself, raising cattle, mending fences, and dreaming of better days. But on that morning, the day everything changed, he'd come to town for supplies. As he tied his horse outside the general store, he heard laughter from the saloon. That laughter, harsh and mocking, wasn't the kind that ever meant good news. "Hey, look who's here." Clint Merrow's voice rang out like a whip crack. The little rancher come to play cowboy again. Caleb froze. He didn't want trouble. But trouble had already spotted him. The gang poured out of the saloon, 5 men with dust on their boots and malice in their eyes. Clint led them, tall and lean, his duster coat flapping in the wind like a black flag. "Well, Caleb Rourke," Clint said, strolling up. "I hear you're still trying to run that old ranch of yours. Shame your pa ain't around to teach you how to be a man." Caleb's jaw clenched. "I ain't looking for a fight, Clint." "Who said anything about a fight?" Clint grinned, then turned to his men. "Boys, seems this young buck needs a lesson in manners." The next few moments burned themselves into Caleb's soul. They pushed him into the dirt, tore the hat from his head, and laughed as they poured whiskey over him. When he tried to stand, Clint kicked him back down. The townsfolk watched from behind windows and half-closed doors. No one dared to help. When it was done, Clint knelt beside him and whispered, "You stay out of town, Rourke. You stay out of my way. Next time it won't be laughter, it'll be bullets." Caleb didn't speak. He just stared at the dust between his fingers. The taste of humiliation thickened his throat. Then he stood, climbed onto his horse, and rode away. No one saw him for a week. The wind howled over the empty plains at night. Coyotes cried from the hills, and inside the old Rourke barn a fire burned. Caleb worked through the dark hours, hammering, forging, shaping. He wasn't a blacksmith, but his father had taught him enough to build something. On the 3rd night, he rode out to the edge of his land, to the place they called the Hollow. There men waited for him, quiet, grim, and loyal. These weren't strangers. They were ranch hands, neighboring, farmers and sons of men who'd once fought in the border wars. They called themselves the Circle of Iron. Caleb stood before them, a torch in his hand, his voice low but steady. "They made us bow. They took our pride, our land, and our peace. But they forgot one thing. You can't kill a man's fire by laughing at it. You can only make it burn hotter." A murmur of agreement rippled through the men. Caleb continued, "Clint Merrow thinks this valley belongs to him. He's wrong. We ride at dawn 7 days from now. Not for revenge, for respect. For our fathers, for every man who was too afraid to stand up. 7 days. That week the plains of Silver Creek were alive with whispers. Horses were shod under moonlight. Rifles were cleaned. Old uniforms were pulled from dusty chests. And at dawn on the 7th day, when the first light touched the hills, the valley was no longer silent. From the ridge above the town, 300 riders stood in formation, every man with the same cold fire in his eyes. At their head was Caleb Rourke, no longer the humiliated boy, but a man reborn in the furnace of his own shame. His coat flapped in the morning wind, his father's rifle slung across his back. He looked down at Silver Creek, at the saloon where it had all started, and whispered, "Now they'll remember the name Rourke." Then he raised his hand, and 300 riders thundered down the hill. The first light of dawn crawled over the ridges of Silver Creek, painting the hills in a pale gold. The valley below still slept, its streets quiet, its windows dark. But above it, on the ridge, the earth trembled. 300 horses stood in formation, their riders silent, their breath steaming in the cold air. No banners, no cheers, just the sound of leather, steel, and hearts beating in unison. At the front sat Caleb Rourke. His hat shadowed his eyes, his father's rifle glinting across his back. He looked down at the town that had laughed at him, spat on his name, and thought it would never see him again. He spoke softly, but every man heard. Today we ride not for revenge, but for peace. They took that from us. Now we take it back. A murmur rolled through the riders, a low growl of resolve. Then Caleb lifted his hand, dropped it, and the hills erupted. The thunder of 300 hooves shattered the dawn. Dust rose like smoke behind them. The sound rolled through the valley like a coming storm. Down below, the saloon doors burst open. Clint Marrow stumbled out, shirt half buttoned, a bottle still in his hand. He blinked toward the rising dust cloud. Confusion first, then disbelief. "What in hell?" he muttered. One of his men ran up. "Boss, riders! A whole damn army!" Clint's grin faltered. He grabbed his rifle and barked, "Wake everyone! To your guns now!" By the time the first riders reached the town's edge, the Black Spur gang had scrambled to take positions. But they were outnumbered, 30 men against 300. Caleb didn't order them to shoot, not yet. He stopped his horse at the end of Main Street, staring down Clint Marrow from 50 yards away. The wind blew between them, carrying the smell of dust and whiskey. "Morning, Marrow," Caleb called, his voice calm, cold. "I told you I wasn't looking for a fight, but you went and found one anyway." Clint smirked, though his hand trembled on his gun. "You think you scare me with your farmer army, boy? I've killed better men than you before breakfast." Caleb dismounted slowly. The rest of his riders spread out, forming a semicircle around the town square. "You made me crawl in the dirt, Clint," Caleb said. "But that day taught me something, that there's only two kinds of men in this world, those who take and those who stand. And I'm done kneeling." He stepped closer, boots crunching on the dusty street. Clint fired first. The bullet screamed past Caleb's shoulder, then everything exploded. Rifles cracked, glass shattered, horses screamed. The air filled with smoke and chaos. But the Dawn Riders didn't break. They moved with precision. Years of ranching made them naturals in formation. They used wagons for cover, pinned the gang down from both ends of the street. Caleb moved like a man possessed and sliding behind barrels, firing, shouting orders. Every shot he fired was measured, deliberate. Then he saw Clint dart into the saloon. Caleb followed. Inside the saloon was chaos. Overturned tables, bullet holes in the walls, whiskey running across the floor. Clint ducked behind the bar, reloading. Caleb kicked through the door, gun drawn. "It's over, Marrow." Clint laughed, wild-eyed. "Over? You think this changes anything? There'll be more like me. Men who'll come for this town, come for your land." "I'll be here," Caleb said. Clint lunged up, firing. Caleb rolled behind a pillar, returned fire. The bullet hit Clint square in the shoulder, spinning him back into the shelves. Bottles shattered, whiskey pouring down like rain. Clint groaned, gripping the wound. You ain't no rancher. You're just another killer." Caleb walked up slowly, gun steady. "No, I'm a man who finally stopped being afraid." He fired once more. The echo lingered in the saloon like thunder fading into silence. Outside, the battle had stopped. The last of Clint's men had thrown down their weapons, hands raised. The townsfolk, who had once hidden behind their doors, now stepped out, old men, women, children, staring at the young rancher standing in the dust. Caleb looked around at the faces, the same faces that had watched him fall a week ago and done nothing. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then from the back of the crowd, an old man stepped forward, the blacksmith. He removed his hat. "Son, I reckon we owe you more than words." Caleb shook his head. "You owe me nothing. Just stand up next time. Don't let men like him own your fear." He turned to his riders. "Bury the dead. Free the town. Then go home. To your families. The fight's done." The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in tears and relief and pride long forgotten. That evening, as the sun bled red across the plains, Caleb stood on the ridge once more. The wind whispered through the grass, and for the first time in years, Silver Creek was quiet, peacefully quiet. One of his men, Eli Danner, rode up beside him. "You did it, Caleb. The valley's ours again." Caleb smiled faintly. "It was never about the valley, Eli. It was about the men who live in it. They just forgot who they were." Eli nodded. "So what now?" Caleb gazed toward the horizon, where the sky burned with dying light. "Now we rebuild. We work the land. And if anyone comes again, they'll find 300 riders waiting before the dawn." The wind carried his words across the valley. a promise carved into the soul of the plains. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, word would spread of the young rancher who was humiliated, who rose again and who taught a whole town what it means to stand